So I will go over any question you have, and this is something I do, and I already said I will come in, or I will do IT period next week. In that period, I will go through all of page 11. I'll do it. 11 is assigned, but I will go through it. And one more thing, in the past, before we had IT, I would do review periods in the evening. I would do it like Sunday, next Tuesday, or next Wednesday. I will go through everything with everybody. I would also give some hints on the test. And I just need enough people to come tell me they're willing to come on that day to make it worth their while. If I get enough people to tell me, I will do it. And I go through a ton of stuff. I get it if you have other responsibilities, but it really does help. Trust me, everyone who goes to those evening review sessions always feel 1,000 times better and do well on the test. I know it's work, but that's life. And so I will go over anything on pages right now, 4, 5, and 6. Anything on pages 4, 5, and 6. And if you don't have anything on pages 4, 5, and 6, do those little page 4 on the bottom, little page 5.
Yeah, sure.
That's on page 2.
Oh,
You want me to do?
no,
You want me to do the bus and the elastic clause really quick? On the bottom of page 2, are you willing to go out of order, or is that just gonna be too much for all of you?
I think I'll manage.
The Bank of the United States, that was gonna be Hamilton's plan to have a bank for the, national bank that would handle government receipts and issue currency, control the money supply, and basically create a banking system. So it's in the bottom right there. Yep. Create a banking system. It's on the bottom of page 2, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, to create a banking system and issue the currency, control the money supplies for inflation or deflation. And Madison and Jefferson opposed it because they said it was an expansion or going beyond the enumerated powers. But the big thing you have to get is that Hamilton said that it was implied power as part of the elastic clause, the necessary and proper clause. Because the government's supposed to print money so they could have a bank. And it would pass. All right, anything on 4 and 5, 6, I will be glad to answer. Yes. Okay, the bottom of page 5. So, the panic of 1873 was a horrific economic disaster that happened because of overspeculation. Basically in land, gold, and railroads. Overspeculation in land, gold, and railroads. And this would create a worldwide economic depression. This financial panic would lead to that. With massive unemployment. And in 1877, the B&O Railroad cut their workers' pay because they could, because it's a depression. And that would trigger this a strike. And soon the militia joined the strike, and it became nationwide strike, cutting out, stopping the entire, basically, railroad system of the Northeast. President Hayes would send troops fresh from Reconstruction duty to brutally put down the strike. Using black troops to put down white soldiers. Panic of 1877. They show that workers have a lot of power, but companies will do whatever it takes. So the railroad strike would turn to what's called the Great Upheaval. The Great Upheaval. Any other for that page? Any other? Any others? Yes. Plessy versus Ferguson, is that on page 6? Oh, there it is on 5. At the bottom of page 5. Plessy versus Ferguson, that's it. Separate but equal facilities were constitutional. So it's on page 5, 1896. Said that separate but equal was constitutional, therefore allowing for Jim Crow laws. So that would be the law to allow for segregation and basically second-class citizenship. For blacks who won that freedom, they won those rights in Reconstruction. It would be partially overturned with Brown versus Topeka Board of Education, which gave you tomorrow. Is there another one? Yes.
The horizontal trusts and vertical trusts.
Is that on page, page 5? Just in period 6. I do like that they have 13% of the exam from period 6. Okay, whatever that means. I put that down because that's what the College Board said. I just think that's funny. It applies, there'll be a couple questions and we'll see. So back to this. Horizontal, vertical trust, those were two different types of monopolies. Basically, it forced kind of a monopoly. Horizontal is owning, controlling all the alike industries. Yes, I do. You don't have it? No, I don't think. You have to go to the library and get one. But you have to bring. All alike industries, like Rockefeller and Standard Oil had all the oil refineries. That's an example of horizontal, and it's a form of monopoly. Vertical integration is controlling all of its production. Like Carnegie owned, controlled the steel mines, the railroads, the mills, all the way up for steel production. So there are two different ways of monopolies or trust. Remember, trust would become synonymous with monopoly.
Vertical control what?
Huh?
Vertical control what is production.
All means of production, like bottom up, yeah, everything. There another one. Carnegie. Rockefeller is actually the example for both, but we use Rockefeller's the Standard Oil is the best example of horizontal. Carnegie is really good example. There are obviously other ones, but they're good ones to go to. Any other ones, yes. Final page 6, basic deployment. That was Teddy Roosevelt's economic imperialism. Bottom of page 6. You see it, but yeah. His economic imperialism. Teddy Roosevelt's economic imperialism. And basically what it meant is to force Latin American countries to allow for American economic control, Latin American countries' economic control, or they send in the Marines and Navy. And the best example of this would be in the Dominican Republic. They literally took over the country for US banks, or Nicaragua. And the US would support dictatorships. Yes, sir.
Agrarian problems.
Agrarian problems. So these are where are we at here? So almost halfway down on page 6. Agrarian problems. And the big thing about agrarian problems were these are what lead to the Populist Party. That would lead directly to the Populist Party. But the biggest ones were debt. Never ending cycle of debt. Overproduction because of mechanization, which led to more debt. Railroad monopolies were a big problem, backing up the prices. The gold standard led to deflation. That's why they wanted free silver. They wanted inflation. And the last big agrarian problem, they felt both political parties ignored it. Both parties ignored it. And that's why they thought we're going to have to make our own party, the Populist or the People's Party. You notice the review, we go through pretty fast. But it helps, even if you have something down, you might have missed something, it makes your review. It's a really handy thing to do. Yes.
Imperialism / Mahan.
Okay, so imperialism and Mahan. Yeah, page 6, right below period 7, where it says period 7 on there. So imperialism, and that's empire for profit. That's imperialism is empire for profit, profit the nation in some way. And the United States got involved with this. The biggest reasons would be Because let's get right to Alfred Thayer Mahan would write The Influence of Sea Power. Very influential, the idea of everyone needs a navy. Everybody needs a navy to protect your overseas empire. You have to have a navy to protect your overseas empire, to protect your trade, to promote trade. So that's when you get a navy and an empire, very influential. Another reason would be to create, to expand the US market after the Panic of 1893. Because of the bad economic time will force people to buy our goods. Another example would be social Darwinism. It would be justified by this, by saying we're spreading civilization and commerce to these people. Or, and remember that, looking back at a horrible term, but white man's burden. White man's burden, the duty to spread civilization. And also just as kind of the fervor, imperialistic fervor. Aren't we a great power now? All great powers have an empire. Let's expand. Look how big our empire is. And that will lead directly to the Spanish-American War and Big Stick diplomacy. Do another one. I hope when I say all this, it's like, oh, I remember this. You're not gonna remember it. Just remember most of it. You're gonna be in great shape. I'm okay. All done. Dawson, page 6. Top of page 6, the Dawes Act, yeah, on the second column, 1887, and that was a plan to turn tribal members into small farmers, and they would divvy up the reservations into homesteads, and then they would give up their tribal allegiance. But land that was not given, spare land, would go to non-reservation members. And the Dawes Act was one of the most disastrous failures in history. Most of the homesteaders on the reservations failed, and that is why today half of all land on reservations are owned by non-reservation members, explaining the incredibly high poverty on reservation. The Dawes Act, if they ask anything about American Indians, and that's a really good thing for a short answer question. Dawes Act is the best example you could give of what the effects of the American Indian was. You can give something with the Dawes Act. I'm not kidding. That's one of the they got it. To non-reservation members who are mostly, like European descent. Yes.
Treaty of Guadalupe, Hidalgo.
Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo on the bottom of page, is that 4?
Yep. 3.
Yeah, right near the top of period 5, on the right-hand side, Treaty of Guadalupe, that ended the Mexican-American War. And the US, they got the Rio Grande as the southern border, and they paid $15 million to the United States for the Mexican cession. From the Mexican cession, California, all the way to Mexico. So we could make it look like it wasn't a war for empire. And so, but it was a war for empire. And so I don't think they'll ask a question directly on the Mexican-American War per se. They might, you never know. Like for an essay question, but they might ask something about like expansion westward. And the treaty is a really good example of that, expansion westward. But here's the big thing about the Mexican, or about the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. It opened up the issue of slavery in the territories, specifically slavery in the Mexican section, which led to the Compromise of 1850. So. Another one? Yes. Not a big one. The Industrial Revolution, which is. I didn't give you a very big box for that, did I?
So what's the really important part?
Well, because I added capitalism and market revolution below. So that's part of the reason why I didn't give a big one for that one. But the Industrial Revolution began in Britain. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain and will be triggered partially by, put up the transportation revolution. Yeah, I do have the transportation. Partially triggered by the transportation revolution. But the big thing the Industrial Revolution would do would be to create the factory system. The factory system where all production is under one roof. all production. And it would start basically with the textile industry and water power, then steam power. And that would lead to the new economic system of capitalism and the wage system. How's that for getting? Because I did have the market and commercial revolution right next to it, and I do have transportation revolution right next to it. But that really is a small bump. I'm sorry about that. I will, by the way, reward you immensely for this. You get a hearty handshake from Mr. Larson down the hall. I know, shake each of your hands. Yeah. Yes. Okay, that's on page 4. Right below the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the nativists. The nativists, does everyone find the nativists on there? The nativists, those that I was anti-immigrant feeling, anti-immigrant, xenophobic feeling. And it was a fear, the two big reasons were fear that they were going to take the jobs and cut wages. And there was an element of that. But also the idea that they weren't real Americans. Whatever that might mean, but different culture. The big thing was different religion, because so many of the immigrants there were Catholic. And so many of the first American immigrants were Protestant. And they would create their own political party that would run for that would be look like it might be the second party in 1856 called the Know Nothing Party or the American Party. The Know Nothing. And they were an anti-immigrant party. So they played on people's fears of immigration. And don't forget, especially anti-Catholic bias. Anti-Catholic. Most of the know-nothings would roll into the Republicans. They would become Republicans. And don't forget, we're gonna have future nativism, we're gonna have the Klan. I mean, it all, it doesn't go away. There'll be a lot of anti-immigrant. Oh, almost forgot one more thing. Nativists, they will look at immigrants as being radicals, bunkering immigrants. We'll see that by the end of this. Yes.
Seneca Falls.
Seneca Falls, page 4.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to find it. It should be near the top. Yeah. Once again, not very much room. Sorry about that. But Seneca Falls, that would be the first ever women's rights conference at Seneca Falls in 1848. And it would demand equal rights, but especially the vote for women. The vote for women. Suffrage. Suffrage. And the two most important leaders for this would be Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who would really organize the Women's Rights Convention, and then Susan B. Anthony would be a tireless fighter for equal rights. And don't forget, a lot of that fight for women's rights would come directly out of the cult of domesticity, where women lost economic value, but then a lot of women were responsible, for the moral upbringing of children. Why not society? Thus, women's rights. There another one. Yes.
Nat Turner's Rebellion.
Nat Turner's Rebellion, is that near the top? Oh, right in Seneca Falls. 1831, a slave rebellion in Virginia. That 50 mostly whites would be killed in the rebellion, but it would be brutally put down. And over 200 enslaved people would be executed or killed. But this freaked out the South. And that's when they passed Nat Turner laws, every southern state, to dramatically strengthen the slave codes. And they blamed Northern abolitionists for this rebellion. You remember that Northern abolitionists, they blamed it, all the Northern abolitionists, soon all the North are a bunch of John Browns, gonna start a rebellion. So that directly would lead to, you can see that, John Brown's right. Is there another one? Yes. Compromise of 1850, and that's, yeah, about 2/3 of the way down, page 4. And that was for the issue of slavery in the Mexican Cession. But Henry Clay would turn that in, he thought he would solve all the problems, but that wouldn't pass. And nearly led to civil war. Nearly led to civil war. But Stephen Douglas would break it up into different bills that would pass to push civil war back, I guess basically 10 years. And the big ones that would pass, California is free, popular sovereignty in New Mexico and Utah territories, pops off, New Mexico, Utah. Those are the two most controversial ones, but the one you have to get is the Fugitive Slave Act. That would force northern free people to help return runaway slaves. Well, actually, return fugitives. And this would infuriate the North, being forced to try to return runaway slaves, which infuriated the South. As they saw, that proved to their idea, the fact that Northerners are all a bunch of John Browns. Beaver government, page 5. Where you at here? Redeemer governments. Oh, yeah. It's here in the middle. I got a bunch of stuff right in there. But Redeemer governments, that's the return of white rule. They literally, they were very explicit about white rule. Sometimes you might hear them called Bourbons. But the reestablishment of white, and they were all Democrats. All Democrats. Democratic white rule, and they would be the governments that would end Reconstruction and eventually lead to Jim Crow laws and the grandfather's clause. And the Redeemers, like it's a redemption, the way it should be. And it would be these Redeemer governments that would push the lost cause. Another one. Yes. Page 4, the cause of the Civil War. Did I leave you one little tiny box? Where's it at? Oh, kind of a big box. Lots of room in there. Okay, the most immediate cause of the Civil War was, of course, Abraham Lincoln's election. That was the biggest cause, and the fear that they'll create a Republican Party in the South, an enemy within. So that was the biggest reason why the election in 1816, Abraham Lincoln. But the underlying cause was the issue of slavery in the territories. Slavery in the territories. And why that was so important is which one would the federal government support? Which system? The free market, free labor system, as they called it in the North, or that slavery system in the South? Which ideology will become dominant in the territories? So that was the underlying cause. Yes, it's slavery, but it's which will they spread to the territories? So you have all these other issues, the fugitive slave law, everything of those directly related to the directly related to that slavery in the territories. Oh, one more thing. And once you have that, the different ideologies. The ideology of free labor or slavery. The ideologies. Because then they just thought our system is right, and so we refuse to accept any other position. Yes. John Brown, about page 4. Right, oh yeah, right above the causes, John Brown, 1859. John Brown's raid. That's when John Brown, an abolitionist who got famous in Bleeding, Kansas, was going to take over the armory at Harper's Ferry and start a slave rebellion. Now, it failed. And he would be executed. But he would become a martyr to the abolitionist cause. Rallying many Northerners, but more importantly, terrifying the South. Convinced that everybody in the North was a John Brown. So if they said they were free soiler, they're hiding their real self. They're a bunch of John Browns. Why is that important? Abraham Lincoln was a moderate free soiler. But to Southerners, he's a John Brown. And he nothing like it. Yeah. Or no. Yes.
Reasons for exploration / technology.
You're going all the way to page 1. I thought we were supposed to stay on page 4, 5, and 6. Who wants to go to page 1? Raise your hand and think that's okay. You didn't get enough votes. Reasons for expiration, I'll do it really quick. The reason for expiration on page 1 is trade routes. To open up a trade route to India and China for spices and silk. That's the first one. But open that trade route to avoid the middlemen, the Ottoman Empire, to avoid them that were jacking up prices. Another big reason was new nation states. The beginnings of more modern countries that could organize the resources to explore. Another big reason was technology, new technological breakthroughs, things like the printing press to spread the information, new ships and sails like the Carrack and the Caravel, and gunpowder. Gunpowder. And the last reason for exploration that I'll give you will be religion. The Protestant Reformation is coming, and the idea of the very evangelical spread religion. There are other reasons, but we're going to go to the main ones. Any others? Raise your hand. How much time do we have? You notice we go through a lot of things. You want me to go faster? Faster? Okay, yes. Laissez-faire. Stuff happened. Next. Laissez-faire economics on page 6.
Yes.
Yes, top of page 6. Laissez-faire economics is the basis of conservative or trickle-down economics. You could see it coming down the road. And it was hands off on competition. Hands off of competition. So let companies compete any way they want. But massive government aid for big business. The best example would be the railroads. Massive government aid for railroads. So that means competition, no government regulation on quality of product or worker safety or monopolies. So by definition, this helps the big because of economies. By definition. So you can see down the road in conservative economics, the whole idea is to funnel money to the wealthy because they're the ones who best know how to produce. Its roots are on laissez-faire. Oh, one more thing I almost forgot. The roots of laissez-faire economics, their roots are from Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton's idea of creating an industrial state. Yes.
Business cycle?
Business cycle right next to it. It's endemic in capitalism, and this is Marx. Marx was the first one to see it. He saw it as capitalism is horrible, but basically what it means is the business cycle is that booms end because of overproduction. Overproduction and overspeculation. And overproduction will lead to prices dropping, and eventually companies have to cut back. So there's always overproduction and they have to cut back. And that leads to falling prices, falling profits. That is when you get the panic. But also the speculation, speculative bubble collapses. And remember, that's called the deflationary curve. And that's when you get a bust where everybody thinks this is going to go on forever. This horrible economic term. Oh, one more thing about a boom. They think booms will go on forever. Remember that bust will. And to get out of the bust, which is long-term unemployment, a depression, and a credit freeze, banks are scared to loan money. What will get them out of it will be almost always some kind of government intervention for demand. To start buying goods, which will get buy goods, increase production, employment, etc. So for example, 1873 panic, it was government spending on railroads. The Great Depression, the New Deal. COVID, massive government spending. Yeah. Rubber burns, page 5. Those are the new entrepreneurs, the big businessmen who would. On page, what page? Page 5, really? Near the bottom, page 5. Robber barons, the new entrepreneurs like Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, who got the name because they were ruthless businessmen who would do anything to drive out their competition. use the power of monopoly to drive them out. And one more thing, they weren't necessarily people who knew their industry. They just knew how to organize the resources and money. Carnegie knew nothing about steel, but he knew that was the future. Keep going, yeah.
Congressional Reconstruction.
Page
Page 5.
Page 5, Congressional Reconstruction. And that is the Military Reconstruction Act. Where's it at here? Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, about halfway down, the Military Reconstruction Act, which broke up the Dixie Grant governments and created 5 military districts. And Confederates, and to protect the rights of freedmen. And former Confederate states would not be allowed back into the Union, would not be allowed back in until they would ratify the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Remember, the 14th Amendment is the most important amendment, because that's the one that guarantees people civil rights and due process of the law. So that would be the also called radical Reconstruction. And so military Reconstruction. That is would base, that law would kind of create our country. 14th, 15th Amendment, what it meant to be in America, for all people have the rights, kind of what's created here. And it would be the 14th Amendment. Or I'm sorry, not the 14th, I'm sorry. Military Reconstruction that would end with the election of Hayes and the Compromise of 1870. Few more? Yes. Second Industrial Revolution on page 6. Now, Recollet period 6, Second Industrial Revolution. And this industrial revolution would give us our world today, and it would be based upon steel and electricity and railroads and chemical industry. The big one is electricity. It would electrify the United States. And this would fuel unprecedented innovation of the second industrial revolution. Everything from new steel production to refrigerated cars to, remember, refrigerated cars changed the way people ate forever. It just changed everything. I know refrigerated cars and Edison's invention, like of the light bulb, etc. The second industrial revolution, and this second industrial revolution would be when the United States would become an economic powerhouse, but would also lead to, because it took so much more capital in the hands of fewer people, vast inequalities in the second. So we have all this economic growth at the same time, fear of revolution. Of the socialism, etc. Start another one. Yes, Bleeding Kansas. Bleeding Kansas, page 6, 5, 4. Page 4, Bleeding Kansas, about 2/3 of the way down on the right. Bleeding Kansas, and that is after the Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed for popular sovereignty. And that would trigger basically civil war in Kansas between pro-slavery border ruffians and free soil jayhawkers. Pro-soil border ruffians, free soilers, and John Brown would be famous for killing border ruffians at Potawatomi Creek. Eventually, the Topeka Constitution would be ratified, making it a free soil state. But the big thing is, this is like the beginning of the Civil War. So, you know, the actual fighting, free soil versus border, free soil versus pro-soil. Got it? Great, and we're done. How about one more really good one? We're done? This is it. I got the first one, that's all. Southern ideology, page 4. Yes. Okay, Southern ideology, page 4. And that's a positive good theory is John C. Calhoun's. I know I didn't yell it. I'll
Didn't
say
say
it.
it correctly.
I'll do it. Calhoun's idea that slavery is a good thing, that's civilizing the slaves, and it's better than the factory system in the North, and how the North treats their workers. It's better in that system. And everybody knows their place. It is natural, they know their place. Yeah. Right. Good. Sounded better. Okay. And that would become the Southern ideology, the positive good theory. The positive good theory would become the Southern ideology to defend slavery. And the second part of that ideology is that all Northerners are John Browns, ready to cut their throat in the middle of the night and start slavery. But don't forget, it's a better system than that Northern system. People know their place. It is stable. Oh, almost forgot one more thing. There's always going to be somebody on top and other people working for them. How's that? That's what Calhoun said. Are we good? All right, so if I get enough people ask me for Sunday, I will do it. A review session in the evening. On Monday, what I said, if you come in, I will go over all page 11. I'll just go through it just like I did here. Sound good? You have to do it, but you know, it'll save you some time. Yeah, I'll try. Yeah, if you can't be here, I will. The only problem is I forget. You have to make sure that people remind me to do it. If you can't come, yeah. It has to be in the evenings. I can't do it earlier, so 6. Then we just say that. It's when I can do it. Or we go at 6 a.m.
No, that's actually not.
I'm not doing it.
Definitely do this Sunday.
Actually, it's supposed to be nice, so I'm gonna be. I'm actually.
You should do Sunday, please.
Saturday and Sunday, I might be going with a former teacher. Looking for bird.
Please do
And probably,
Sunday.
huh?
Please do Sunday.
I'll do it Sunday. All right, everyone, I'll see you later today or tomorrow, whatever. Have a great day.
Thank you.
I hope that helped. I see some of you got a lot. I hope it's familiar. That's the thing. If it's familiar.
It's like ringing bells, like, oh, I remember this.
That way-
Some of the things I remember the day we learned the.
That's fine.
It's more about.
Well, that's if you told my work. All day. You know, 30. Yeah. Yeah. I gotta check this out. And you're gonna be golfing?
Yes.
Where you golfing tonight?
All right.